Hi, I'm Mike McCabe. I'm the author of Blue Jeans in High Places and founder of Blue Jean Nation. Back in 1854, an amazing thing happened right in this room, this Little White Schoolhouse in Ripon, Wisconsin. Slavery was the dominant issue of the day, and people back then were feeling politically homeless. There were two major political parties, the Democrats and the Whigs, and people felt helpless. They felt that their voices weren't being represented. Both of those parties were pro-slavery, and there was a growing abolitionist movement that was demanding change, demanding the end of the institution of slavery. People came to this place, this schoolhouse. They came here divided. They came here calling themselves Democrats and Whigs and Free Soilers and abolitionists. They walked out of this schoolhouse united in calling themselves Republicans. They shed old labels and they fashioned themselves a new identity. And they used that new identity to change the face of American politics. Yes, they ended slavery, but they also compelled our government to again do the will of the people. And we've got an awful lot in common with those people who gathered here in this schoolhouse more than a century and a half ago. We again have arrived at a time when people are feeling politically homeless, when people are feeling as though their voices aren't being heard and their interests aren't being represented. So many people go to vote and they feel like they're doomed to hold their noses and choose between the lesser of two evils. And so again, we're at a point where the political parties are failing us. And that's just not my assessment. You look at Gallup polling or Pew Research or any major media poll, the percentage of Americans who today refuse to identify themselves as either Democrats or Republicans is at its highest level in 3/4 of a century. We've been trained to think and talk about politics in ways that make us active participants in our own disempowerment. We've been conditioned to think about politics horizontally. Who's on the left, who's on the right, who's in the middle, who's liberal, who's conservative. If you take that horizontal political spectrum and you flip it up on its head and you start thinking vertically instead, you don't think about who's on the left or who's on the right, but you think about who's on the top and who's on the bottom. Think about who are the royals of American politics and who are the commoners. Think about who's not just who has the most money, but also who has the most power in society, who has the strongest voice, whose voices are weakest or most muted. You think vertically instead of horizontally, and a magical thing happens. Let me give you just a very practical example. Think about a man living in Clark County, where I grew up, about halfway between Eau Claire and Wausau. Clark County's farm country. To this day, there are more cows than people in Clark County. Now that man, chances are, is a farmer. He's also probably poor. Clark County is one of the 5 poorest counties in all of Wisconsin. He's white. He's Republican. When you think horizontally about who's on the left and who's on the right, you would call him a conservative. Now take a woman living in Milwaukee. Let's say she's a nursing assistant, a CNA. Chances are she's also struggling to make ends meet. Nursing assistants don't make a whole lot of money. Chances are she's black. She's voting for Democrats. Again, you think horizontally and you would say that she's a liberal. You would put her on the left. Thinking horizontally, those two people couldn't be farther apart. They are divided and conquered. You flip that spectrum up on its head and think vertically. Think about who's got the most money and who's got the least, who's got the most power and who has the least, whose voices are heard and whose voices are ignored. Those two people are in exactly the same spot. We are needlessly dividing people who could and should be united just by the way we've been trained to think and talk about politics. And part of what we have to do is break free of that vocabulary and those labels that are no longer doing us any good. It's shorthand, it's code that has helped us sort of make sense of the political world, but that code is garbled. Those terms don't mean what they used to mean, and all they really are doing is dividing people who actually have an awful lot in common. We need to break free of that thinking. We need to break free of that vocabulary and those labels. And when we do that, and when we stop thinking horizontally and we start thinking vertically, we have the ability to pull people together to get ordinary people back to the point where they can have a strong voice and their rightful place in American society again. I wrote this book, Blue Jeans in High Places, to try to create a blueprint for how we could adapt the lessons of those past generations to modern conditions and current circumstances. How we could build a similar citizen movement in our time to put citizens back in the driver's seat of our government. That's something that we need your help with. We need to begin to pull citizens together to think about how we can shed old labels, how we can create a new political identity. And our challenge is to draw from these lessons, to take these tactics that were successfully used back then and adapt them to modern conditions and current circumstances. That's why we're forming Blue Jean Nation. That's why we're looking to shed labels and stop talking about who's on the left and who's on the right, who's Democrat and who's Republican, but rather find a way to unify people around a new identity and use that identity to drive change in our two-party system, to use that identity to change the face of American politics again. And what we've got to remember, and what we can draw inspiration and hope from, is that we don't have to make history, we only have to repeat it. We only have to dust off some of these strategies, these successful ways of making political change, adapt them to our time, put them to work, and we can get citizens back in the driver's seat of our government at a time when the major political parties are failing us. That's our challenge today, and I ask you to join Blue Jean Nation, to join with us, to come together, to fight against a system that is failing us, a political system that's broken. So check out Blue Jean Nation and then join us to make change in American politics, the kind of change that past generations were successful in making in their time. Thank you very much.